Thanos, the Mad Titan, a world-conquering genocidal eternal bent on game-ending half of the population of the universe to bring, as he likes to say, balance. Versus Nolan, as well as his son Mark, one the former champion of Earth and the other one just trying to pick up where he left off, to varying levels of success. But anyways, for this matchup, I'll be using the iterations from the anime television show, so up to season 2 so far. And the version of Thanos that I'll be using is the one we see in Endgame. No Infinity Gauntlet, no stones, but he will have an entire army as well as a Black Order under his rule. For narrative's sake, let's say this episode picks up during the 4th episode of season 2, where Omni-Man is pretty much the king of the planet Thraxa, but instead of Viltrumites running up on Nolan and Mark, it's the Mad Titan with the intention to kill half of the Thraxan population, with Omni-Man valuing the lives of his subjects, as well as Mark refusing to lie down with the threat of such a huge loss of innocent life. And just like that, the stage is set for a battle that would determine the fate of the planet's population. Is this Thanos guy nothing that Omni-Man hasn't seen or dealt with before? Or will the Mad Titan and his forces prove to be too much for the Viltrumite father and son? But before we answer that, I gotta thank you guys once again for the abundant amount of support. You guys have been tearing down the like goals left and right, and because of it, the channel's been growing at rapid succession. The last 3 times I've asked for 1,000 likes, but seeing as how you guys got that done in a day, 3 times in a row, this week's like goal will be 2,000. I know it's pretty far, and it's double what I usually ask, but I know we can hit it. And hey, if you guys get 1,000 likes within 24 hours, I will drop 3 shorts in a row like I did last week. But with that out of the way, let's get right into today's matchup. Alright guys, and seeing as how much times I've covered Invincible scaling, and yeah, I know it will be a little different today, but I haven't talked about the MCU since January. And even then, it was only 1 of 2 instances I've ever talked about the MCU on the entire channel. So it's only fair that I talk about Thanos first. Fortunately for myself though, the Mad Titan scaling is pretty easy as it comes from mostly inverse stuff during the events of the final 2 films of the Infinity Saga. One might initially assume that none of base Thanos' metas come from Infinity War, but this isn't really the case, as he has 2 major instances in this film that do scale to his base. The first of which is when he beats the Hulk in hand-to-hand combat in a state where he was not utilizing the Power Stone. I think recently there was a scan that did say he was, but there's no purple hue emitting off of Thanos, and the directors of the film kind of also stated that he was not using the stone when, you know. During this fight, the Hulk is blatantly overpowered and just thrown. This is pretty impressive because the Hulk that Thanos beat was post-Sakaar Hulk, the same green Goliath that's stronger than the Hulk that we see from Avengers 1 and 2. This is notable because during these 2 movies here, the Hulk is just blatantly shown to be the strongest Avenger. So we can use any feats from these Avengers movies to kind of use to upscale Thanos off of. Thor is someone who's consistently shown to be weaker than the Hulk during this period of time, and this is pretty notable because during his first film, Thor was able to shake an entire planet, which comes out to around country level if I remember the calculations correctly. And during the same film, he was able to defeat the Destroyer, which harnessed the earth-shattering power of the Odin Force. Seeing as how Thor can shake entire planets, with casual blows from the hammer being able to do so, I think it's fair enough that we take this statement pretty literal. The Versus Wiki has earth-shattering at requiring around multi-continental amounts of energy, so there's that. Some scaling consistent with this is the fact that Thanos is able to utilize the complete Infinity Gauntlet, which is stated by Tony Stark to harness enough resting energy to blow up an entire continent. Thanos obviously can tank and endure its resting energy, even being able to utilize the full 6 stones in a state where he's literally stabbed through the chest by Thor's most powerful weapon being Stormbreaker, a weapon made on Nidavellir, which Rocket Raccoon states to be a place where the most powerful weapons in the universe are created and crafted.
Nidavellir is real? Seriously? I mean, that place is a legend. They make the most powerful, horrific weapons to ever torment the universe.
Rocket Raccoon being the one to state this is very important for the weapon Stormbreaker scaling, as Rocket Raccoon in the past has been able to construct weapons that are powerful enough to destroy entire moons, meaning that Thanos possibly took a moon-level attack to the chest and almost immediately proceeded to endure an energy potent enough to blow up an entire continent, and he was able to survive. And apparently only a couple days later, he used the stones as to destroy the stones, meaning that in terms of attack potency and definitely durability, Thanos would fall around at least country to likely multi-continental to possibly even moon level. For some more direct scaling, Thanos' Uru Blade is stated to be stronger than Vibranium, a notion that's shown in the film as Thanos is able to destroy Captain America's shield after a prolonged onslaught of slashes. The same shield is able to no-so a blow from Thor's hammer, and the sword itself is shown in Multiverse of Madness to be a one-shot gap stronger than his own base. So if you don't think Thanos scales to multi-continental to the moon, moon level, his sword most definitely does. Moving on to speed now, Thanos is pretty much like all of the MCU around massively hypersonic to even FTL. The first low end would come from Thanos scaling above Thor in hand-to-hand combat. The same Thor who could box with Hela, who could react to lightning at massively hypersonic speeds, with the script of the same movie stating that Thor moves at that speed as well. But I think overall relativistic to like low FTL is fair enough for Thanos, because he has a surprising amount of light dodging feats, mostly due to Iron Man's repulsor rays, and he's also able to react to Captain Marvel's photon beams in a state where he's very weakened. So yeah, that should wrap up the Mad Titan stats, but here's some more, supplementary stuff. Most of the Black Order is pretty much cannon fodder, with pretty much any street tier Marvel character being able to box him out. But you have high tiers such as Cull Obsidian, who is shown to be able to fight on par with the Hulkbuster Mark II, a model stronger than the one we saw from Age of Ultron, a suit that was stated to be the only thing on Earth that would be able to fight the Hulk, meaning that Cull Obsidian off the bat scales above like most of the Avengers, or at least like early Avengers, like Phase 2 Avengers. And he also has the Jatari army as well as, it's pretty vast overall, being composed of foot soldiers, outriders, and even the big Leviathans, I think they're called. So yeah, the Mad Titan is certainly a strong individual, and he has certainly the army as well as the help to back up his title as the most feared thing in the universe. Once again, I want to reiterate that I'm not going to be talking about the comic book iterations of these guys, because it wouldn't really matter because the scaling's pretty much the same, but it's still notable because I don't have to talk about feats such as the explosion of Viltrum and how dubious it is, as well as any crossover scaling these guys get. But anyways, let me start with the weaker of the two Viltrumites, being Mark, or Invincible as you know him. Invincible is by far one of the strongest characters on Earth after his father leaves the planet, so he would upscale any of his peers, a notion that overall finds itself pretty consistent as the Immortal concedes to Invincible's statement that he's stronger than him. Being stronger than the Immortal is actually pretty important because the Immortal kinda scales to Omni-Man, but as for feats that belong to Invincible exclusively, he has shown the ability to slam Alan the Alien into the moon, with the yield of such explosion getting calced upwards to be equivalent to 300 plus megatons, which is around mountain level. Nothing really impressive overall, especially compared to Thanos, but his higher ends he receives from scaling relative to his father. Well, kinda scaling to him, as he was a competent ally to Omni-Man during the Thraxa battle, being able to fight on par with pretty high level Viltrumites, with both of them being able to individually fight Nolan. With Craig, another high level Viltrumite, stating that the performance proved his worth to the Viltrumite Empire, as well as reaffirmed his heritage. So in layman's terms, Mark's best scaling comes kinda from scaling to Omni-Man. It's not really a 50-50 split in terms of power, but he scales to him enough where it's fair enough to assert that Mark should scale to at least casual Omni-Man feats. So let's get into that. Nolan only really has a couple of things to talk about, especially seeing as though we're talking about the cartoon, which is pretty early into its run. First of all, Nolan is shown pretty blatantly on screen to destroy a huge area of the Flaxan homeworld. We can see entire city blocks and cities are destroyed in the wake of his rampage, with him producing huge city-sized dust trails in his wake, and the feat gets even more impressive once the shot pans out, so we can see the full extent of his conquest, with some calculations getting it as low as a couple hundred gigatons, which is island level, and some calculations getting it up to multi-continental plus, fairly deep into the exatons as well. I'll put both of the calculations on screen so you know that I'm not lying, but I'll give y'all a second. Alright, moving on now. Omni-Man has two feats we can use to argue he's past multi-continental and all the way up to moon level, as he was able to literally no-so the gravitational pull of a black hole, and he pretty blatantly overpowered its pull, which gets his lifting strength to around class P, which is equivalent to the weight of small moons. And yeah, I know lifting strength and AP don't really correlate, but it's something to at least kind of consider. But something much more quantifiable and concrete is that he was able to divert a meteor the size of Texas, with the calculation asserting that Nolan can exert force equivalent to around 50 exatons, which is enough to get moon level almost 2 times over. Moving on to speed now, a good baseline to talk about the show in terms of speed is where Omni-Man and Mark are playing catch with one another. Omni-Man's casual tosses have been calculated to be around massively hypersonic. Obviously he scales to it as Mark can react and catch it, but Mark in the same scene exerts himself a little bit more, and he was able to throw the ball at sub-relativistic speeds, with Nolan being able to catch it almost, no difficulty shown at all whatsoever. He can perceive it and he can react to it. But I want to note that this instance would only scale to their combat and reaction speeds, as their travel speed is a lot more dubious and up for contention. But I'm of the opinion that it's much slower while in an atmosphere, a sentiment reaffirmed in many guidebooks, as well as Omni-Man in the show stating that they have to build up their speed. Just pointing this out because I know a lot of people like to scale Omni-Man to the casual Thraxa feat. Everyone likes to scale that to their base combat speed and reactions, but in the show it states that they have to push themselves once again, build speed against the airflow, a factor that isn't really relevant in the vacuum of space. And I just think that it's very inconsistent, you know, because the Immortal was able to catch Omni-Man while flying at Mach 3 speeds in the Invincible Season 1 finale. But overall, I think the baseball instance is pretty good. Using that as a metric, I think you could assert these guys to be around relativistic plus to FTL, especially for Omni-Man, who could just blitz Mark, and Mark only kind of getting up there due to kind of scaling to him on Thraxa. So yeah, I still think these guys get around FTL for sure, but I think people just get a little too excited when asserting MFTL plus speeds. Especially when the show makes it very apparent that they don't start at that speed and have to build it up, and they actively have to control themselves so they don't create disasters on the planet. Something that's shown multiple times throughout the television show. But in conclusion, I would have these guys at around multi-continental moon level, with them getting around relativistic to FTL, with it being much more solidified for Omni-Man, and Mark at least scaling to the lower ends of such tiers. Alright, so with the stats of both of these guys laid out, who would win? Well, Thanos is a powerhouse after all, and if that wasn't enough, he has his own version of SEAL Team 6 in the Black Order. And if that isn't enough, he has an entire army backing both of them up. So how would I see Nolan and Mark dealing with all this? Because granted, they have a lot on their plate. Well, at first glance at least. But once you take a better look at it, I think that there's something in the Invincible show that we can equate this situation to some degree. And that situation would be the Flaxons. But this time, Omni-Man ain't standing back until the very last second, as Omni-Man goes straight for the captain or the leader, in this situation being the Mad Titan himself. So how do they compare in stats? As previously mentioned, they both be around multi-continental to moon level at their highest, but you gotta remember, Omni-Man is just much deeper into it. As Thanos' moon level scaling comes from the fact that he was able to survive Stormbreaker, but he was still very critically injured after the attack. And unfortunately for Thanos' scaling, Stormbreaker upscaling a moon-busting gun doesn't really help his case because the manner in which it blows up moons is never seen. So you can't really assert that it's any stronger than baseline moon level, a tier of power that Omni-Man scales into 2 times over, sitting at around 55 exatons respectively. So realistically, I don't see what's stopping Omni-Man from just flying over to him and just dragging him out, similar to how he did the Flaxon King. From there, I think Mark would be able to take out Cull Obsidian, who's the second biggest threat on the field. And heck, Nolan might not even have to tell Mark to lock in because he was fighting pretty competently against the Viltrumites while holding back. Characters much stronger than Cull Obsidian. So with those two guys out the way, it should go without question the rest of the Black Order are dead from there. They're kind of just cannon fodder, street tier level people. But now, how do they deal with this huge army? And I think they could do it, as Omni-Man is someone who's harnessed his abilities for thousands of years. I could see Omni-Man trying to harness his speed to kind of a smaller scale, just to where the armies are, and just wiping them out just by simply flying slightly faster than he usually does. I think off the bat, that would kind of kill like 90% of Thanos' army, and then Mark and Nolan could just brute force the other 10% remaining. And even if they couldn't do that for whatever reason, Viltrumites have near inexhaustible stamina after all. True, Thanos has his Uru Blade, and I do think he would give Omni-Man some trouble, but seeing as how Omni-Man is faster much more consistently, as well as having the attack potency replicate Stormbreaker's AP almost 2 times over, I don't think it would help him that much. So overall, with mid difficulty, I see the father and son duo winning this matchup more times than not. If you made it to the end of this video, I'd like to thank you guys personally for watching. It kind of humbles me to see how much you guys care about what I got to say every week. It's not the longest time in the world, but even giving me 1 second of your time goes a long way. And hey, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe. I post weekly videos as well as multiple shorts throughout the week. So I think you get a lot considering it's for free. But to all you guys who've been watching my video so far, what did you think of this matchup? Do you think I was wanking Omni-Man and Invincible? Would they get overwhelmed by Thanos and his forces? Or is this matchup about what you expected? Be sure to let me know in the comments. But until then, I'll see you guys next week. So remember, stay big G fans.